We have Upamanyu Chatterjee in conversation with Pragya Tiwari. Pragya will be introducing Upamanyu, but I'll just tell you a little bit about Pragya. Pragya has edited publications such as Vice and Tehelka and writes on politics, culture, and public policy. She also works as a public policy consultant with NGOs and with corporates. So Pragya Tiwari in conversation with Upamanyu Chatterjee for this session, The Revenge of the Non-Vegetarian at the Rajan Kilachan Mughal Tent.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again. And thank you for coming out to listen to us. We have with us this afternoon an absolutely brilliant man who has managed to be hugely successful in two different careers, as a civil servant and as a novelist, at a time when most of us struggle to keep up with one career, or one life rather. I'm not going to get into a lengthy introduction because if you're here this afternoon, you're certainly here to listen to him, and I assume that means that you're familiar with at least some of his work. So what I'm going to do over the next 45 minutes before we open it up to the audience is ask him a couple of questions about writing in general, and more specifically about his new book, The Revenge of the Non-Vegetarian. And of course about English August, because I believe it is illegal in most countries to meet Upamanyu Chatterjee and not ask him about English August, and not ask him to what extent Agastya Sen is based on him. So I'll certainly be doing that. So it's going to be an interview of sorts. I say of sorts because I'm going to ask him questions and he is going to answer some of them and not answer some of them. He's not the easiest person to interview. And even so, here I am on stage interviewing him, and this is not the first time either. 3 reasons. One is no decent journalism ever came out of avoiding discomfort in your line of work. 2, because like thousands and thousands of others, I'm a big fan of his writing, and not just English August. I have read The Revenge of the Non-Vegetarian thrice now, and it only gets better with time. And finally, because I really enjoy listening to him, despite or perhaps because he's such a difficult interviewee. Welcome, Upamanyu.
I thought you'd never end. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to be here so far. So shoot.
Right. So you wished I'd never end, rather than you thought I'd never end. You thought this would be simple, and I just go on for 45 minutes, and then, well, that didn't happen. So, what? You're back after 5, 6 years, 7 years at the Jaipur Literature Festival?
Yeah, I have this sort of hazy memory of having done something at the Darbar Hall with Amit Chaudhary a long time ago. It probably was, about 6 years ago, Not a remarkable event, but...
Do you enjoy being interviewed?
No, not at all. Not at all. But at some point, publisher or family, someone wakes up and says, "Look, just go out and meet people,
and talk to them." Okay.
Yeah, just be a little sort of sociable. So this is part of it.
So I'd asked you this question earlier, but I don't think you answered it. I'll try again. Is it because you don't like talking about your work, or is it just a sort of Flauberian disappointment in your interviewers?
No, nothing. It's it's old-fashioned in the sense that you think, well, the book is done, it's published, it's out there. If if people are nice and they haven't lost their reading habit, they should just go and read the books that I've written, and that's it. In the sense, I mean, it's not so much a publicity-driven vocation. I mean, you wrong thing to say. I'm quite happy not coming to Jaipur, but there it is. It's part of the give and
That
take.
it's not a publicity-driven vocation is a very radical opinion. Moving on, you've been a fairly prolific writer. Is there any sort of how do you tend to begin? Is there something that you usually that comes to you first? Themes, plot lines, characters? Is there any kind of pattern?
Yeah, anyone who writes would knows that. There are thousands of ideas, germs for stories and books in one's head. Some of them fructify, very few of them fructify, and the rest are just lost. And if you jot things down, then months, years later, you come across scraps of paper with some ideas in them which you think, oh, this might work. So it's, what was the question? No,
How do you
you've
tend
forgotten
to
it too.
How do you tend to start? This is for the
Yeah.
20% of people who come to JLF who are not writing a book.
Well,
Or
that's
two.
it. And they're leaving. Um, I mean, a full-length novel is like a marathon. So it gives you a lot of elbow room. You can add stuff, put in all kinds of irrelevant stuff just because you think that it's nice to read. A shorter story or a novella would be like it's a terrible comparison, like a 100-meter dash or a middle distance event. But so I think you would need to be a little more, a little less rambling. But anything, you know that, anything can be the germ of a short story or.
Fair enough. How disciplined are you as a writer? Do you write in bursts and then not, or do you?
Yeah, well, in the sense that, I am quite, I try and write every day, yeah. Except this morning, because, you're not in your habitual surroundings. But, I sit down at my desk and nothing comes out, but I still try and, try and write every day, yeah.
Do you either before writing or at any point in time, do you tend to read your older works, or is it done when it's done?
Yeah, or done, over and done with. Over and done with in the sense that, it's like babies, I think. It's just launched. They're just out there. I did reread English August 2 or 3 times. Once for the screenplay, once for the Mammaries, once for this, so that you don't make any bloomers. But otherwise, no, I don't read.
Is there anything that you've written that you don't like?
No, I don't. This, funnily enough, is quite easy for me to do. They're over and done with. I don't judge them. I don't, no. I don't say, oh no, I should have changed, or this doesn't work. No, none of that. They're out there. They're just launched.
That's fantastic. You speak more than one language. You speak in English, of course. You speak Hindi, Bangla, Marathi, because you've worked in Maharashtra for a long time. I believe you speak French as well. Is there one language? Do you always think in English, or do you think in multiple languages as well? I think I'm trying to ask what your relationship is like with different languages.
Well, in the sense, I try and now read not try, I do read now in Bengali and French, because just to keep myself in touch. Because now I don't, there's no one around now that my parents are dead, with whom I can speak Bengali. This I've said at in various forums. My Bengali friends and I speak English. I'll say it again. And in fact, the only living being I speak Bengali with now regularly is our dog, because she's very sensitive. I read in Bengali, I read in French, but Marathi is now getting rusty because now I left the government a little over 2 years ago. So the Marathi I could read, write, and speak was administrative Marathi. That's now. I can still follow it, and I can, I'm sure, find my way around Bombay speaking Marathi. But my Hindi is actually quite good because I actually dealt with the dissemination of Hindi for 5 years in Shastri Bhavan. So yeah, but language is a sensitive thing because the fact that it is such a political issue here in India, it doesn't bother me because one needs to be calm about
Political issues.
no, about language.
Do you, when you think of your characters, do they all speak in English when they're speaking, or have you had this moment where there's a particular character who only tends to speak in say Bengali, and you translate him?
Well,
into English?
both the. It depends on circumstances and whom a character is speaking to. If he's buying cigarettes, I presume that he will ask for them in Hindi, and the panwala will respond in Hindi or in Bombaya Hindi if it's in Bombay. All that. That's not. I don't find that tricky or intricate.
No, I wasn't asking if it's tricky. I was just asking if that happens. Is it? Do you find it useful to know more than one language as a writer, even though you write in English?
Well, everyone in India, in fact, I used to think only in India, but even in Europe, everyone is sort of bi or trilingual. With ease, with fluency. So I don't see that either as an issue or a problem. One is always, especially during composition, saying, if you. And most of the time, if it's this, to continue the earlier example, if it's buying cigarettes, it's not metaphysical, complicated stuff that is being exchanged. Do wills dena, that kind of stuff. So, complex thought, such as it is, I suppose would be in English. Yeah, no, it's an English language book.
Okay, your writing has been compared to many great writers. Bellow comes to mind, Camus comes to mind, Kafka comes to mind, Kundera comes to mind. Who were your influences, particularly when you started writing initial years? Now, I suppose you're very much your own writer, but did you have any conscious influences when you started out?
Well, I read completely indiscriminately and chaotically. So I can't think of a single writer who who I just set out to sort of consume. But if you ask me, I have a sinking feeling that you're now going to ask me for my favorite books.
I wasn't going to, but now I will.
I should answer that before you. Since I read indiscriminately, Sigmund Freud's the interpretation of dreams was just there in the library in my MA days, and God knows why I picked it up. But I found I was very, very impressed, and it's not as though then I began writing about dream sequences or anything. It's just so because I read indiscriminately, there are sort of certainly passages and chunks of books that remain in my head. But do I right-keeping, crime and punishment in mind. No, no.
Sure, but I mean, I meant perhaps a little bit more subconscious influences than let me trace out Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. But because you brought up favorite books, I'm not going to ask you that question and let you off. It wasn't even on my list, but I will ask you, what might be some of the books that you have read more than once and deliberately, so not because you'd completely forgotten that you've read this book?
I can't. No, I can't. I mean, can't think of any book that I've actually reread because I sort of loved it so much. No, if I was going to recall a passage, yeah, maybe just where the hell was that kind of thing. But actually, no. I don't do that. It's a bit like it's a bit like the books you write. You just once they're gone, they're gone. So once they're consumed, they're.
Sure. You said you read indiscriminately, which I assume implies there's no structure to it. But you're saying it's never happened that you've read a writer and really liked a book and said, okay, I want to see what else they have, and then kind of read more than one book, or then one book has led you to the other. Nothing of the sort? No structure at all?
Agatha Christie, I think. That's, I think, or James Headley Chase. No, I can't. I can't. You don't read a fat Dostoevsky book and say, okay, I'm going to read the other one. No. But since you read indiscriminately, you sort of come back to, say, the third or fourth Dostoevsky at some point. But there is no system in my reading. No. You don't believe me?
No, I do believe you. Of course, I mean, I don't take anything you say in an interview seriously. That apart, I do believe you for the moment. By which I mean I will move on, and I will not press you on this. But there is a follow-up question. Do you read for research?
Oh yeah, lots, all the time. I mean, not all not all the time. Of course, you have to. Yeah, for this wretched thing took all kinds of. In fact, it's funny that the novellas and the short stories that I have done over the last 3 or 4 years, have led me to read the most boring books, but sort of informative. The New Cambridge Economic History, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I for research, yeah, I suppose everyone does.
Absolutely final question on this before you get very irritated with me. Again, coming back to the indiscriminately part, you didn't. Have you ever read any author and said that, okay, I really like, say, how he creates mood or she writes dialogue, and reread it as a student of writing rather than just an interested reader?
No, I mean, I'm sure, subconsciously or things stick in my mind, but I can't think of any particular passage where I said, wow, I'm going to copy this. No. Or I like the way, half of them are not half, a lot of them are in translation, so they don't count.
Sure.
Because you're already, at 2 removes from the original. So, and on the rare occasions when, again, French and Bengali, when you have read the original and are reading, you have a translation on the side to see whether it's well done. Some of the translation is just, it's just so bad. It's quite sort of mind expanding. You think that, oh my God, people who will never read the original will think that this is what the writer wanted to say. So actual sort of texts that have actually inspired me, I can't, indirectly, I can't at the moment think of any.
Fair enough. Moving on to English August, let's get that out of the way. 30 years now, 30th year of publication of English August.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. It's been a long and fantastic run.
Yeah, it's sorry. Yeah, it has. Yeah, it's been very. It's been a long haul. It's been especially for a book that was rejected by God knows how many publishers in the first 3 years. Yeah, it's very very nice to see that it's still around. Yeah.
It's a very vague question, so answer it as you please, which I know you will anyway. But did you think it, I mean, at what point did you see it becoming a cult classic? And what do you, I mean, what does the success feel like to you? It's a phenomenal success. I mean, people still talk about it in a way that is very rare to hear about books, at least nowadays, or published recently in the last 10 years. And did it also come with a lot of expectations that you perhaps didn't care to, perhaps would have liked not to deal with?
Well, it's obviously very very nice. It's very flattering to still have people read English August, to find that it hasn't dated, or it's dated sort of nicely, and the jokes are still funny and so on. That's very nice. What is not so nice is that everyone else expects the succeeding books to be like English August, but that I can't help, because the succeeding books are all different in tone and subject matter and theme. But it's still extremely flattering to have people remember a book like that. Yeah.
I can imagine. You keep getting asked quite often if to what extent Agastya Sen was based on you, or how, to what extent Agastya Sen was an autobiographical character. And more than a couple of times you've replied by quoting Henry James,
I
saying...
was going to again.
I know you were going to do that. So, anticipating that answer, he was likely to say that Henry James once said that novelists don't need to write autobiographies, but he tends to stop there. And what I'm going to ask you is, what does that mean in your context? Why do you keep picking up that quote?
Well, it sort of it sums up what I'd have to say on the subject. You write, at least I write a work of fiction because it's you'd like to talk about something that is of interest to you. So it's yeah. I mean, both English August and the Mammaries are fictionalized versions of life in the districts and life in a big city, seen from a civil servant's point of view. And I've been a civil servant, so I mean it's obviously based on autobiographical experience. But it's I mean, I think it's true for a lot of people. You can't, unless you are interested in that subject matter. And the moment you exhibit that interest, you are using part of your life. I mean, if you're not, if you don't find that, oh, this is something that would make a good book, you don't start to write it.
That's interesting. So you are sort of extending the definition of what autobiography means here, because usually the way people understand autobiography is that this happened to me. This is me. I went from place A to place B. I ate this and I met so and so. So obviously you're extending that definition to things observed and things.
Yeah. It includes, I mean, things that you've thought about, things that have happened to you, things that you've watched happen to other people. It's the largest sense of personal experience.
Fair enough. Do you still think about Agastya Sen every now and then? I mean, in the way, I mean, he lives on in the minds of your readers, and they keep talking about him more than sort of often. Do you have a sense of where he might be in life? Does he come back?
Well, I last thought of him when I was doing The Revenge, but well, he's around. Might bring him back for something else, but yeah, he's around.
You know, okay, moving on from English August, that's all I had to ask you about English August. I maybe we'll come back to it when we start talking about this book because it kind of has linkages to English August. But veering away for a minute, you have responded to things that have happened in real life, whether it was assassination of Indira Gandhi or the Arushi Talwar case, in the form of fiction. Have you ever thought about writing non-fiction?
No, I mean, no.
Is there a reason?
No, it just doesn't enthuse me. I mean, fiction is so much more fun. Even when you can, some of these short stories have sort of dollops of non-fiction in every sort of third or fourth paragraph. No, non-fiction in itself, this kind of scholarly tome, no, with footnotes and stuff, no.
That's not the only kind of non-fiction that exists.
You mean this kind of
tomes.
racy?
Creative non-fiction.
Well, that's full of lies, is it? No, what is creative non-fiction?
I don't know, Kapuczynski, which was full of lies, but...
What did you say there? What?
I was trying to make you perhaps elaborate a little bit more on why not non-fiction.
No, it just doesn't... by non-fiction, it's the stuff with footnotes. That's how I see it.
No, it could also be journalism. Like it could also you going to a crime scene and then writing about it as you see it, and it's definitely not dull. It can be, in fact.
Yeah. Well,
no.
No. No.
Okay, I'll leave that be. I may be mistaken, but I remember you saying somewhere in some interview that I think you were talking about Shakespeare, and you said that your interviewer, asked you, talked about Shakespeare being a poet for all humanity, and you said nobody's a poet for all humanity, or something of that nature. I was going to ask you, do you have I agree with that statement, whether or not you made it. Nobody is a poet for all humanity. Do you have a particular reader in mind when you are writing?
Well, I mean, I haven't actually thought about the reader, but someone vaguely like me, I guess, likes reading, doesn't mind well-constructed English sentences, but is in love with reading, yeah. I mean,
do you take feedback? Do you, your first draft is done. Do you have people who you?
No. No, because unless it's completely sort of done, I don't show it to anyone. And the flip side is that if someone says, "Hey, this is rubbish," I don't accept it. I mean, it's done. You just take it or leave it.
And does that extend to? Do you have expectations from readers and from critics? I mean, does it bother you if they completely get the book wrong, or if they've read it, or do you feel like it's out there and they can do what the F they want?
I mean, in the sense you read a bad review, this is Chekhov, I think, who said it used to upset him for 3 days. Someone's waving. Hello, is that a? It used to upset him for 3 days. So that's more or less it. Obviously you don't like reading a bad review, but fortunately it doesn't last too long. It just...
Okay, forget about the critics. Say somebody walks up to you after this session and says something about your book.
That was a really bad book. Wow.
No. Or they loved the book and they loved how you did X or Y, which you did not intend to do at all. And does that irritate you? That's not the point of that book.
One of the nicest moments of my dull life was, God knows, 2 decades ago, the usual plane 4 hours late, rotting in the transit lounge in Bombay. And this sort of bearded JNU hepcat, he came up to me and said, the last burden, that was about me. Oh, a nice thing to hear. But that sort of really makes your day, makes your week. Fortunately, no one has come up to me so far and said, that was a really bad book. Touch wood, so far. But,
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
What is great?
That no one's ever actually come up to you and said that.
No, don't give people ideas.
He will be available afterwards for book signing and a couple of words if you'd like to exchange them. But I was wondering, I'm going to start talking about The Revenge of the Non-Vegetarian, so this is a sort of precursor to that. Have you ever written anything, it doesn't have to be a book, where you've had a very clear moral standpoint that you are taking and you're sort of keen that it gets through to your reader?
Well, they all have, I think. I mean, my stance in most of these books, where a stance needs to be taken, is actually quite clear. It's clear in this, but it's also clear in it's clear in those short stories, in Othello Sucks, I find that if you sort of write seriously, you can't not have a clearly defined position.
It is clear in this book. That's interesting to hear. Okay, so Madhusudan Sen. I don't know how many of you have read the book, but the protagonist of the book is a gentleman called Madhusudan Sen, who happens to be Agastya's father. It is not really a sequel in any, not at all a sequel to English August, but Madhusudan Sen, who made a cameo in English August, is the central protagonist of this book. Did you think when you were writing English August that you might revisit Madhusudan Sen? Was he sort of already fleshed out by them and you had to leave him out for the sake of brevity, or at what point did he start to become a person?
No, of course not. The germ of the revenge is the death penalty. I was intrigued by the subject. I have been for. It's one of those things that one wants to know more about, and one postpones for decades. And then I read something called the Death Penalty Report, which is a publication of the National Law School in Delhi. And then I found out that the death penalty is not really an issue here. It exists in India. And beyond, I think the Supreme Court once saying that it should be in the early 90s or late 80s, that it should be used in the rarest of rare cases. It's not something that has been resolved yet. So that's how the book began, at least the germ, that let's write a work of fiction about the abolition of the death penalty, till you realize that it's not at all an issue here. But in that death penalty report, there were just so many heart-wrenching cases of people languishing in jails for 15, 17, 20 years, awaiting trial. And some of them were actually pretty gruesome as the one that I finally, not selected, but I put together 3 or 4 cases, combined them into one. And then it suddenly went out of hand. The death penalty went out of the window. It became this man's story. And since it was stretched over a 20 or 30 year period, I had to set it in the late 40s. I needed a civil servant. Suddenly things sort of click into place. So Madhusudan Sen was an afterthought. In fact, one of several afterthoughts. But the more I thought about it, I said, okay, this just might work. So,
and it works. I want to talk a little bit more about it is, I mean, in the at least the way I read it, the book is one of the, the core of the book is the severe inadequacies of the criminal justice system, to put it very mildly. But Madhusudan Sen himself, he's a man, when you first meet him, he comes across as a sort of very straitjacket, very much the product of his generation. But then, of course, as you get to know him, even in this short space of a novella, you see that, like any good character, he has his contradictions, he has his moral ambiguities, he gets an abattoir shut down because he is very disturbed by how animals are treated, but he loves his meat, eating his meat passionately. He wants the debate on the death penalty to continue, but obviously feels that it's justified in certain cases and has trouble. He comes across as somebody who's aloof, but obviously forms very, very strong bonds, and one of those bonds is the central driving force of this plot. And he is a stickler for rules, but then, without giving too much away for those of you who haven't read the book, in the climax he does something that is very unlikely, that's uncharacteristic, and dishonest. Did you feel that was in him? Did you feel that he was driven to that point because of the journey that he went through, with this sort of the vagaries of the criminal justice system?
He's, if you really are looking for a point of contrast between him and his son, the father is a man of action, that's all. He's intelligent, he's competent, he's capable, and he's, as you said, a stickler for rules, but if he doesn't get what he thinks is right, he'll ensure that, things fall into place so that, what he wants happens. He's a man of action. He's, for me, it's just the sort of thing he would do at the end. He sees that facts and he says, okay, this is rubbish. It's what.
And he isn't the sort of person who's ever going to regret this, because we don't know what happens thereafter.
Yeah. But
no, that was a question. Do you think he might ever regret that act?
no. In fact, no. Not at all. No. I see him very clearly. I see him more clearly than I see his son. Actually, yeah. He's,
I was going to ask you this later, but I'll ask you this very quickly now because the contrast between the father and son has already come up. You were roughly Agastya's age when you wrote Agastya, and you are probably closer to his father's age when you fleshed Madhusudan out. I don't know if that's a pure coincidence, but I wanted to ask, A, whether it is, because you just said you see Madhusudan more clearly, and B, because, well, I barely know you, but I'm often surprised when people say that you're like Agastya because you are so much, to me, you feel so much more like Madhusudan. So A, the question was, I know you're going to forget what the question was. So A, was that really a coincidence that you were of, the age thing? The second question is the generation question. Agastya, a lot of people feel, was more than the sum of his parts. He represented a certain kind of urban individual from the 80s or whatever. To that extent, how much is Madhusudan also a product of his generation?
well, I don't see myself as Madhusudan Sen, no. But I just see him, as I said, as a man of action, as a highly principled civil servant. And, he would, that last facts, he would see it as the correct thing to do, tear it up. That's what I'm saying. This is rubbish. That's just it. And forget it, it's done, over. his son probably obviously wouldn't. But the reason why English August and Agastya Sen still strike a chord is, because it's obvious. He makes the book. He makes English August, which is not the case with his father. It's not as though Madhusudan Sen sort of bestrides this novella, no, because the poor sod is as much a character that one remembers. So, and the other point of contrast is that English August is sort of acutely plotless, which was intentional. But this is, it's actually very plot-driven. There's a very strong storyline. I don't think you can, which wasn't your question, I don't think you can carry the sort of compare and contrast stuff between the two beyond a point.
Fair enough. I know that you said that the germ of the book of revenge was the criminal justice system and the death penalty. And then it progressed to the state of the criminal justice system and rule of law. But we live in times when there is a lot of politics over food, over what we can and cannot eat, and justifiably so. There's a fair amount of public and moral political debate on public lynchings of Dalits and Muslims simply because they've been accused of eating meat, or there's a suspicion that they were trading in beef. Was that something that you were thinking of also when you wrote this book?
Well, the title is a bit of it's a catchy title, and it's a bit of a joke because, people would think that it's related to, contemporary issues, but it's not. But it's a kind of catchy and very appropriate title, so I just let it be. But my own point of view would be Madhusudan Sen's, which is that, the law is very clear on what you can eat and what you can't. And you please do respect the law. But having said that, you should also, within the boundaries of the law, eat what you want, which is exactly what he does.
Absolutely, but respect the law goes both ways. I mean, the law is also very clear on what action you can and cannot take against people who break the law. You can't kill them, so,
That's obviously illegal.
Fair enough. There's a scene, there's a related question, it's a very small question. There's a very small scene in English August where Agastya, I think, talks about how it gets his family, religious Hindu family's goat, that his father eats beef, and he proceeds to eat beef near a sadhu's abode. And I remember reading this when I was very young, and I read it as just one more act of defiance by Agastya. But of course, if I read it today, I would tend to read into it, right? I can't help, but I wouldn't be able to help but read into it. Did you see it? And I wonder whether people in every generation imagine political issues to be just their own. Did you see it as an act of, as any kind of political act when you were writing it? For Agastya, not for this.
No. No. He has many more other, he has far too many other problems.
Also, he doesn't come across as he comes across as rather apolitical, but I wonder if he really was.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. It wasn't in sort of issue capital I. No.
Okay, I think in some interview you were asked that you wanted to write about the Nithari murders, and I think you were asked, why didn't you? And you said that I was intrigued by the answer you gave, which was that you were afraid of cannibalizing the story. And what I understood from that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were worried that the moral core of what you wanted to write would get lost in the sort of spectacle of blood and gore.
Yeah, more or less, yeah. Then one feels like a ghoul, sort of attacking the subject matter, and then you begin to suspect your own intentions, and you say, "Oh my God, this is just because there's just so much obscenity in the largest sense in the story." So I backed off.
But you have written about, increasingly, you over the years, you've written about violence. This book has a lot of violence in it. You've written about violence in several of your other books. So you have managed to obviously tame the beast. Um, what has that journey been like? Given that you have this apprehension, how have you managed to assuage it?
Well, on a sort of case-by-case basis, it's not been very easy. This was one, girl was another. And apart from Nitaria, there was one more where I was going to, I can't remember which one, another some ghastly case. I wanted to, and then I backed off saying, no, I can't get into this. I wasn't sure of what I would gain or what I would bring to it. So,
You wrote a short story called Othello Sucks. And what you were, one of the things I suppose you were also saying as part of that short story was that you found it very problematic that as a white playwright, Shakespeare decided to write this reductive black character, right? Has this sort of, politics of representation ever bothered you as a writer, especially when you're writing characters that are very different from you? Say you're writing a minority character or something of the sort.
well, not not yet, in the sense that I haven't actually dealt with in any depth any major character sort of absolutely different from me. And I found...
Sorry, but you have, haven't you? Okay, I don't want to give the plot line away, but one of the characters here is that of a servant, and he is a very complicated character who does something not quite nice.
But it's not as though one has to sort of get into his soul and sort of, describe it. He's dealt with quite, I think, externally. It's Madhusudan Sen's moral stance, which is not complicated, at least to me, that interests me in one sense more. But as I said, the idea that, have you dealt with characters that you would need to get out of yourself for? No, not yet. And I'm not sure I'd be able to with any success, in this day of.
Have you gotten better at writing women characters over time?
Not sure. Not sure because.
Okay, let me rephrase. Are you more comfortable writing women characters over time?
Well, there haven't been any very major. Well, The Last Burden has one or two. A couple of the stories that should see the light of day this year have, but they are not, they're not something madly profound or complex or anything.
Okay, quick question. Do you see Madhusudan Sen coming back in any of the books? Do we get to see his journey from Undersecretary to CEC to Governor of Bengal, or his love story with the woman, or romance with the woman who he ends up marrying? Are any of those plot lines brewing?
No, well, you can never tell, but at the moment, no. At the moment, no, but maybe in the future. Yeah, there's a...
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to quickly ask a question, which is, and then hand it over to the audience. One, which is that English August was made into a movie. I believe, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it or not, but The Revenge might also be made into a movie. Is this something, this act of translating prose into a screenplay, Is that something that you find interesting, challenging, discomforting, and what lessons have you learned from English? Because also very different books, obviously, in terms of, like you mentioned, plots, etc.
Well, it's some kind of top secret, so don't mention it. But yeah, we are trying to convert this
Right,
into
not going out of this room.
yeah, we are trying to convert this into a film. Screenplays are actually, I hope uh, Dave Benigal doesn't hear this, they are very, very boring to write. Um, you take an A4 foolscap. Uh, his theory is that there should be more of white in it than black when you finish with the page, meaning just throw all the descriptions out, throw everything out. Um, Dialogue should be in sort of monosyllables so that even the most retarded can follow. Uh, Stage directions, light, whatever, camera on top angle, that kind of stuff. It's all very, very simple. But the advantage is that then you actually look at the page of the book in a different light. And you say, okay, we don't need any of this. And the flip side is, since you don't want you don't want a film with 40 minutes of voiceovers, all the stuff that you put in here in indirect prose has to be converted into reasonably interesting dialogue. A court case, for example, here you can just say, they took 2 years to wrap up, the prosecution took 6 months, but there you can't do that. So so it's different. It's different, what I mean, if you're writing fiction, prose fiction, you don't. It's not really sometimes. So maybe it is. It's not really that visual. You're not actually seeing. Okay, what is? Because it's actually it's description. It's not. What are you seeing with a camera? What are you? So it's a different way of looking at. It's such a different way actually of looking at a plot that it's I don't know. It's recreation in a literal sense. Yeah, I suppose I shouldn't call it boring. It's actually quite interesting, but pity the stuff that goes out.
Well, all the best with that. I think I'm going to have to open it up to the audience now. Okay, there's a question there.
So in your book, The Weight Loss, Bhola is a character who seems to be in a path of spiritual degradation. Do you expect your readers to be appalled by the behavior of the character, or do you want them to endure the character for his journey? That's my question.
Well, it would depend on. I mean, it would depend on the reader. I obviously have a lot of empathy for his decline. I remember an old friend of mine asking me, why is he such a loser? And I said, but what is there to win? It's a. In fact, a belief in nothing is, is a completely valid sort of belief. Bhola is a character who really is not into. I mean, it's clear in the book that he believes in nothing, and maybe he needs something to hold on to. It took. I mean, he's as close to me as Agastya is. It took me a long time to work on him, get him to. Lots of people hate the book. They find it distasteful, but it's of value to me.
Here, please.
So some of your books have very creative insults.
What do you mean?
For people who, let's say, Agastya doesn't like. I want to know what your most favorite insult is for people you don't like.
Which most of my insults are just, obscene four-letter words. So, not the kind of thing that one would want to share in public. It's true that English August has quite a few of them. And I don't mind sharing with you that it took me almost a week to write. If you remember the passage, Agastya is Sanskrit. He wanted to say, for one who flushes the toilet while he begins to piss and tries to finish pissing before the water runs out. And that's to get that. I didn't get the sentence correctly, but, it just took so long. But that's just, it's just part of it.
Sorry, I wanted to ask you what all the languages that you know, which is the best one to abuse in?
Oh, Punjabi. I mean, anyone who's grown up in Delhi would know.
Back over there, please.
Good afternoon, Ms. Tiwari, Mr. Chatterjee. I have this question which I wish to ask every novelist. How true are the acknowledgements?
Well, in my case, they're quite, I mean, there's nothing to lie about in an acknowledgement. No, they're quite I'm quite honest with them. There aren't, I mean, why should, well, unless you want to drop names, is that what you mean? No, I'm quite honest with them.
Up front and then at the back, please. Just wait for a minute, right after this. Thank you.
Yeah, my question for you is regarding the name Agastya and sort of tying that into the title of English August. When did that come about and what was the creative process behind that element of the book?
Well, it's a long time ago. I wanted just both clearly a Sanskrit-based name and a name that could be anglicized. I suppose you could choose other names where you could also anglicize them into something that that works. This is just it's just one of several choices.
This is the only woman who's put her hand up, so she gets to ask before you. Sorry, but we still have time, so you will get your chance.
Hello, sir. With this book coming up and the entire talk about the vegan movement sprouting in India, with the Vogue saying predicting that 2019 is going to be the year of the vegan. So how have you kind of anticipated this response, or how is this book of yours going to feed into this vegan movement that India is coming up with?
Yeah. As I said, the title is only, I picked the title well because it's appropriate, but also because it's sort of catchy, and people would hopefully be tricked into buying the book thinking it's about a sort of contemporary political issue. This is not the right place to say it, but I wish I was vegetarian. I really wish I was vegetarian because politically it's just so correct. But, vegetarian food is very, very boring. I'm very, very sorry to say. It's just very boring. It's all palak paneer. I mean, there's just, and those besan ka, I really wish I was vegetarian, but you'd lose your taste buds, then you can turn vegetarian. But so vegan I understand is, dairy products are out, and what? Everything is out, right? So I gluten, all that, so that's tough.
Okay, the gentleman over there has been waiting for a while,
And
so we'll
this
just...
will be the last question.
Okay.
Hi, I've been a fan of English August for 25 years, and I wanted to ask you this question for 25 years. Did you ever get into trouble at your job for writing such a book in which you screwed your employer so badly?
Um, you don't think I've not been asked this question before. There are two things. One is that, the nicest letters I've received after the publication of English August were from senior bureaucrats. One was from someone 20 or 25 years my senior who said that, this is exactly what happened to me and it's marvelous. And someone else who said, I didn't know you'd been to Assam, someplace in Assam, because that statue of Gandhi that you described was just bang outside my window, etc. So I've had very nice, touching letters from other civil servants. Beyond the fact that they, for 30 years they thought me an oddball. Not only no repercussions, but they've been very, very, very nice. The bureaucracy is huge and very stable and very tough. They can take a book like that.
Okay, we're completely out of time. I did want to ask a related question, which is that, you were a part of the system, part of the criminal justice system, sort of tangentially, and of course part of the bureaucratic system, and you have observed it so acutely and so brutally. I always wondered whether it made it easier or tougher for you, or did you really have the Chinese wall between the writer and the bureaucrat, as you have maintained? But I'm not sure we can answer that perhaps for the next time. Or I hope, Upamanyu, you'll be buying lots of copies of this book, and he will be signing books at the book signing tent. So maybe you can ask him this on my behalf. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Upamanyu, for talking to us and
One
for being
more
so
time,
patient.
A big round of applause for the session, The Revenge of the Non-Vegetarian, to Upamanyu Chatterjee and Pragya Tiwari. Thank you so very much.